She thought she had simply inherited a house. But in the basement, she and her daughter found a letter from her grandfather and a door that no one was supposed to open. See how one past event changes the future. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you are from. The last shovel of dirt hit the casket with a hollow, final thud that echoed too loudly in the quiet hills of Highview Cemetery. The sound landed in Lauren Baxter's chest like a stone, sharp and undeniable. Around her, the small gathering of mourners had already begun to drift away, murmuring platitudes and promises of casserole dishes that would never arrive. Only Nora remained beside her, shoulders stiff beneath the oversized cardigan she'd borrowed from her mother's closet that morning. Her chin lifted slightly too high for someone barely 19. Lauren didn't cry. She hadn't cried at her husband's funeral either, 2 years earlier, when the cancer had finally taken him. Her tears had long dried up, sacrificed on altars of late-night emergency shifts, mounting debt, and now the second funeral in as many years. She stared at the mound of earth for another minute before turning wordlessly back to the car. There were still bills on the table at home, still a leaky faucet in the kitchen, still her daughter's tuition to worry about. Dead or not, her father didn't get to pause the chaos of their lives. The ride home from the cemetery was silent but heavy, filled with thoughts too sharp for conversation. Nora fidgeted with the corner of the envelope she'd slipped from the stack of mail that morning, turning it over and over in her lap. Lauren had seen the envelope. Cream-colored, thick paper, the kind that meant either bad news or rich lawyers. She had deliberately left it unopened. If it had anything to do with her father, Edgar, it could wait until the numbness wore off. Back at the house, everything was as they had left it, quiet, clean, and carrying the stale perfume of a life suspended. The picture frames on the mantel had begun to collect dust again. Lauren dropped her purse by the door and went straight to the kitchen, bypassing the envelope Nora had placed carefully on the table. "We need eggs," she said aloud to no one in particular, opening the fridge to a nearly bare shelf. "And milk. And maybe—" She stopped, her voice swallowed by the kind of silence that had become too familiar in the years since death first took root in their home. Nora joined her after a minute, holding the envelope like it was something fragile or dangerous. Lauren didn't look at her, didn't want to see the cautious hope in her daughter's eyes. "It's from a law firm," Nora said quietly. "I can read. It says Highland County. That's where Grandpa. I know where my father lived on Nora." Silence again. Lauren finally took the envelope and slid it open with a butter knife. Inside was a single-page letter, written in neat, impersonal language, notifying her that she was the sole heir to a parcel of land, 62 acres in Highland County, Virginia. The document referenced mineral rights and an enclosed deed. There was also a note handwritten in the same stiff scrawl she remembered from every birthday card he'd ever sent her. "You don't have to believe me. You just have to go." She set the papers down and walked away. Nora picked them up again after her mother left the room and read them twice. Her fingers hovered over the words mineral rights and unregistered land improvements. She knew just enough from her part-time work at the university archives to understand that these phrases hinted at something more than a patch of forgotten dirt. But she also knew her mother wouldn't care. To Lauren, her father had been an eccentric old man who abandoned his family to chase ghosts and golden myths. He had died the same way he had lived, on the margins, misunderstood, and alone. But Nora remembered the stories. When she was little, Edgar had visited a few times, bringing with him old maps and small mysterious objects. An iron key, a brass sundial, a compass with initials she hadn't been able to read then. He had called her Little Historian, and she had clung to the nickname long after the visit stopped. Her mother had forbidden contact after a particularly bad argument she never fully explained, and Edgar had faded from their lives like a dream interrupted too soon. Now, sitting alone in the kitchen while Lauren lay motionless on the couch, Nora reread the letter for the third time. A map was paper-clipped to the deed. The land was located near a section of forest outside a former mining town. No road led directly to it, just a marked trailhead and a footpath noted as Old Surveyor's Route. In the morning, she brewed the coffee while Lauren sat in silence and staring at her chip mug. "I want to go," Nora said. Lauren didn't answer. It's not just trees, Mom. There's something there. He wrote that for a reason. Lauren didn't respond until the coffee was cold. That evening, she pulled an old file box from the bedroom closet. It had sat there for years unopened. Inside were letters, postcards, a picture of her as a girl perched on a rock beside a grinning man in hiking boots with dirt-stained hands. Her father. In one of the envelopes was a photograph she didn't remember seeing before. A hill covered in trees and a faint outline of what looked like stonework, just visible at the base of a cliff. On the back, in her father's sharp handwriting, "The mouth is closed, still waiting." 2 days later, they drove through the winding roads of Highland County in Lauren's aging Ford Escape. The further they went, the fewer cell towers appeared, and the more the trees leaned over the road like old gatekeepers. When they reached the trailhead, the sun had begun to lower behind the mountains. The silence was complete, not just absence of sound, but presence of something deeper. The land didn't look like much from the outside. A rusted gate, a weathered sign half swallowed by vines, and an overgrown path that led into dense, untamed forest. But Nora walked with a quiet certainty that her mother couldn't ignore. They parked and set up a small camp near the old shed Edgar had once written about in a letter she had refused to read at the time. The shed was barely standing. Its roof had partially collapsed, but inside, under a tarp weighed down with rocks, they found crates. Nora opened the first one and immediately froze. Inside was a metal compass, old but well kept, its needle still swinging slowly, as if searching for the right way forward. Beneath it lay journals, dozens of them, each one labeled with dates and cryptic titles like Phase 2 and Hydraulic Drafts. Lauren felt the first tremor of doubt. This wasn't a madman's clutter. This was a system. That night they sat by a small fire and read through pages of diagrams, coordinates, soil compositions, and theoretical engineering notes. Edgar had mapped something, a series of chambers, pressure points, water redirection systems. It read like a civil engineer's dream, or a cryptographer's. Lauren lay awake long after Nora had fallen asleep. The fire had died to embers, and the wind picked at the edges of the tarp covering the crates. She remembered something her father had once said when she was a child, sitting at his feet on the porch. Some truths don't die. They just wait to be seen. She had dismissed it then as nonsense. Now, in the shadows of this forgotten forest, with the weight of his research around her and her daughter sleeping beside her, it sounded less like madness and more like a promise. In the morning, Nora was already up, kneeling in the dirt with one of the journals open on her lap. She looked up as her mother approached, eyes bright with determination. "He wasn't chasing gold," she said. "He was preserving something." Lauren didn't answer, but she sat beside her, picking up a page that detailed a system of water channels and stonework reinforcements, dated 1864. At the bottom, in a different ink, Edgar had written one word in careful print: ready, and so were they. By the time the sun had broken through the canopy of highland trees the next morning, Lauren found herself already knee-deep in questions she couldn't yet articulate. The air smelled of moss and earth, and dew still clung to every branch like a thin memory. Nora was crouched by the old crates again, this time with a sheet of tracing paper and a sharpened pencil. She had spent the better part of the morning copying one of Edgar's hand-drawn maps, an intricate rendering of what appeared to be an underground system, complete with passage dimensions, contour lines, and notes in the margins written in hurried, cramped letters. The notations were mathematical, the terminology precise, far too technical to be the product of delusion. Lauren had sat quietly for the first hour, watching her daughter's fingers move quickly, methodically. She had never seen Nora this focused, not even during her school projects or finals. There was something almost reverent in the way she treated the materials, like she wasn't just recording history, but translating it into a language she and her mother could finally understand. When Nora rose, she handed Lauren a duplicate of the map and pointed to a set of faint coordinates labeled in blue ink. "He called this point the threshold," she said softly. "It's north of the main ridge, maybe an hour's hike if the terrain isn't too rough. He mentioned vines above and the last living eaves. That might refer to the tree line." Lauren nodded, more from instinct than comprehension, and they packed what they needed: flashlights, water, gloves, and a small toolkit Edgar had stashed in the back of the shed. The path north was dense, tangled with undergrowth that hadn't seen a machete in years. But Nora led with certainty, her eyes constantly shifting between the map and the landscape, her breath quickening only when they reached the crest of a knoll that opened into a narrow ravine. It was there, tucked into the slope beneath a sagging curtain of ivy and roots, that they saw it. A cleft in the rock, almost invisible from a distance, concealed by fallen branches and the natural erosion of time. Lauren stepped closer, noting the unnatural flatness of the entrance stone that had clearly been worked by hand. The opening was only waist-high, but inside it widened into a rough corridor, the walls shaped by both nature and intention. The light from their flashlights caught on something almost immediately. Scrawled across the left wall was a symbol, a circle with a triangle bisecting it and a small notch at the bottom. Beneath it, a second mark, simpler, an arrow pointing downward. Nora compared it to the symbols in one of Edgar's journals and exhaled sharply. "They're trail indicators," she whispered. "He left these deliberately. This is the right place." They advanced slowly, the air growing cooler and heavier the deeper they moved. The floor dipped at a gradual angle, and moisture began to coat the limestone beneath their boots. 50 yards in, the passage opened slightly, revealing a small antechamber where several narrow corridors diverged. Lauren swept her flashlight over the walls and paused. There were carvings. They weren't random or ancient glyphs, but deliberate etchings, angular and geometric, like instructions or blueprints. Some had arrows, others notches or circles. In the center of the far wall was a recessed niche holding what remained of a rusted metal bracket, possibly once a lamp fixture. But what drew both women forward was the floor. Beneath a layer of sediment and moss, the stone was patterned with shallow grooves, too intentional to be erosion, too uniform to be accidental. Lauren crouched and brushed her glove across the surface. The grooves formed a shape, barely perceptible. A large square, approximately 4 feet wide, flanked on either side by 2 smaller squares. Nora stepped back and looked at the map again. "This configuration matches the Phase 1 diagram," she said. "It's supposed to be a pressure release system. He thought the vault was protected by water diversion. This would be the entry point." Before Lauren could respond, her flashlight flickered. A battery warning. She reached for a replacement when something on the far wall caught her eye. A set of metal pegs had been hammered into the stone at shoulder height, bent slightly with age. Above them, painted in faded red, were 3 initials, TII, followed by a year, 1864. Lauren stood silently for a long moment. Colonel Thaddeus Ashford. The name had appeared repeatedly in Edgar's notes, but always obliquely, as if he were unsure whether the man had truly existed or was just the nucleus of legend. But here, buried in the Appalachian dark, was indisputable proof. Someone had been here over a century ago. Someone with knowledge, precision, and a reason to hide his work beneath the mountains. As they emerged into the sunlight once more, both women felt the pressure of something larger than themselves taking form. They sat near the entrance, panting from the hike, and spread out their findings across a canvas dropcloth. Nora laid the traced map next to Edgar's originals and began cross-referencing notations. Lauren noticed her daughter's knuckles were scraped. The rock inside had been sharp, unforgiving. She wanted to tell her to stop, to go back, to pretend the world hadn't just tilted on its axis. But she also remembered that look in Nora's eyes when she found the compass the day before, a mixture of reverence, wonder, and need. Back at the shed that evening, Lauren tried to distract herself by cleaning, organizing the journals by date. But no matter how she arranged them, a pattern kept emerging, a progression of discovery, hypothesis, confirmation. Edgar hadn't just speculated, he had tested, recorded, revised. His notebooks read like the meticulous work of an engineer, not the ramblings of a recluse. At dusk, they heard the sound of tires on gravel, not the familiar bumbling sound of a local truck, but a low, steady hum that ended abruptly near the base of the trail. Lauren turned off the lantern and they waited in silence. After a few minutes, a figure emerged, well-dressed, poised, and entirely out of place. A woman in a tailored blazer with hiking boots too clean to have seen real use. She approached the gate without hesitation, stopped at the no trespassing sign, and scanned the shed with casual precision. Lauren recognized the type immediately. Authority with a smile, control and a friendly handshake. She stepped forward before the woman could speak. "Ms. Baxter?" the stranger asked, pulling a card from her coat. "Harper Gray, representing a consortium of environmental investors interested in rural revitalization projects. We understand you've recently inherited property in this region." Lauren said nothing. She took the card but didn't look at it. "We'd like to discuss a potential offer. There's interest in developing a historical education site here, perhaps even ecotourism if the land is conducive. Of course, this depends on geological surveys, but our team is prepared to offer an initial figure." Nora appeared in the doorway behind her mother, holding a journal. Harper's eyes flicked toward the book and back, assessing, calculating. Lauren's voice was quiet. "We're not interested." Harper smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I understand. Still, these things are rarely urgent. Take your time. Think it over." When she left, her SUV didn't rattle or bounce. It was too smooth, too new. It belonged in a parking lot outside a courthouse, not these hills. Later that night, Lauren found the shed's padlock broken and one of the crates overturned. Several journals were missing. Nora found a footprint just inside the threshold size 10 brand new tread. They didn't sleep. The next morning, Lauren called an old friend, Madeline Carr, a retired geologist who had once worked on hydrological surveys across the region. She arrived just before noon, winded but curious. Lauren showed her the journals, the maps, the notations. Madeline read in silence for over an hour. "This isn't amateur work," she said finally. "Whoever designed that cave system understood water pressure, limestone erosion patterns, and long-term drainage dynamics. This is engineered protection. Your father wasn't looking for gold. He was guarding something." Madeline confirmed the rare symbols as consistent with Civil War-era engineering marks. She pointed to certain equations in Edgar's notes and translated them aloud. Most dealt with seasonal water tables, flow rate thresholds, pressure valves. The math was solid. Nora retrieved a final journal from the remaining crate. Inside was a single page taped at the end. "Lauren, if you're reading this, it means I've failed to complete what I began. I never wanted you to carry this burden. But if they've come for you, know that the truth is deeper than treasure. The evidence is real. The maps are real. The danger is real. And so is the cost of silence." Lauren folded the page carefully and placed it back inside. They were already too far in to turn around. The stone wasn't just carved, it was marked with memory, strategy, and purpose. The land her father left them wasn't a bequest, it was a challenge, and they had accepted. Rain had come overnight, not a storm, not the kind that split the trees with thunder or sent rivers surging over roads, but a quiet, steady fall that seemed to settle into the bones of the forest. It wrapped the trees in mist and coated every surface with a soft sheen. In the gray dawn, the Baxter land felt less like inheritance and more like a boundary marker between worlds. The past no longer lingered quietly. It loomed. Lauren woke to the sound of water dripping from the edge of the shed's slanted roof. Her body ached from sleep on the cot Edgar had left behind, but her mind was already moving. The words from his final journal entry echoed in her head. "If they've come for you, know that the truth is deeper than treasure." She hadn't told Nora how much those words unsettled her. The note wasn't just a confession or apology, it was a handoff, the kind that happened in moments of war, not family. Nora was already outside, sitting cross-legged on the tarp they had laid beside the fire pit. She had spread out the original map, now protected by a plastic sheet, and next to it were 3 of Edgar's notebooks, opened and annotated. Her phone sat beside her, displaying a set of calculations she had converted from his handwritten figures. Lauren watched her daughter mutter quietly to herself, checking water flow rates against slope angles and adjusting decimal points with a precision that might have startled Edgar himself. "We have a window," Nora said when she noticed her mother watching. "If the rainfall holds like this, we should have a 3-hour drainage cycle. Just like he wrote, it's not flooded yet." Lauren didn't reply immediately. She crouched beside her daughter and looked over the figures, recognizing enough from her nursing background to see the structure, patterns, cycles, systems that, when understood, became predictable. Nora wasn't playing detective. She was solving a puzzle someone had buried a century and a half ago. By mid-morning, Madeline had returned with her field gear. She brought a sealed pack of geological tools, waterproof bags, and a look of someone who had committed herself to a cause that outweighed curiosity. She spoke quickly, her words clipped with focus as she confirmed that the cave's limestone formations matched historic mining reports from the 1800s. The engineers who had once dug beneath these hills had done so with more than extraction in mind. Nora led them back to the hidden entrance, retracing their steps from the day before. The rain had altered the trail slightly, made the rocks slicker, the ground softer, but the way was still clear. The forest was hushed as though watching. Inside the cave, the air felt denser, as though the pressure of unseen history waited just ahead. They reached the main corridor and descended further than they had dared before. Nora checked Edgar's notes repeatedly, referencing a sequence of glyphs he had recorded along the walls. Each one was a marker, a warning, or a confirmation. They passed through a narrow passage where the ceiling forced them to crouch, and then into a larger chamber where the air changed. It was cooler, not from temperature alone, but from proximity to flowing water. In the chamber's center was a pool, ringed by stone columns that had been reinforced with iron rods. Edgar had written of this place, the Chamber of Recess, he called it, a man-made structure designed to collect and distribute water through the rest of the system. The pool's surface rippled slightly, even in the stillness, suggesting a current below. Across the water, a second doorway beckoned, marked by a symbol Lauren now recognized. The compass rose, split with a vertical line, Ashford's emblem. "This is where it starts," Nora said, her voice tight with awe and fear. Madeline helped them set up the safety lines. They wouldn't be swimming, not yet, but if anything went wrong inside the next series of passages, they needed a way back. Their headlamps illuminated the descending tunnel beyond the chamber, a spiral slope that narrowed with each turn. The sound of water became louder here. No longer a whisper, but a constant murmur, like breath through a massive, unseen lung. They reached the next chamber, smaller but unmistakably constructed. The walls were too smooth, the corners too precise, and in the center stood a stone pedestal, waist-high with 3 indentations on its surface, a compass-shaped groove, a shallow ring, and a narrow slot. Edgar had described it in his notes as the activation interface, an anachronistic phrase that underscored how little he'd trusted conventional language to explain what he'd found. Lauren retrieved the compass they had recovered from the crates, now secured in a padded case. She placed it in the corresponding groove. Nora handed over the brass ring inscribed with Ashford, 1864, which Lauren had worn around her neck for the last day like a talisman. It fit perfectly into the circle. And finally, the iron key, short, thick, and engraved with initials they hadn't deciphered, slid into the narrow slot with a soft click. The chamber responded immediately. There was no great shaking of the earth, no cinematic grinding of gears. Just a faint hiss as pressure adjusted, and a section of the wall to their right receded, revealing another tunnel, low, dark, and wet. Water trickled down its center, barely enough to reach their ankles, but evidence of larger flow patterns was etched along the stone. This was the flood path Edgar had written about. If they waited too long, it would rise. Nora checked the time. They had 2 hours. The tunnel narrowed again before opening into a hidden chamber, one that stunned them into silence. The room was octagonal, with vaulted stonework that arched overhead like a cathedral. In the center stood a sarcophagus-sized chest, wrought iron bound in brass, its lid decorated with reliefs of eagles and stars. On either side, lantern brackets still clung to the walls, rusted but recognizable. Around the chamber were smaller alcoves, storage spaces perhaps, each sealed behind iron bars. Lauren stepped forward and ran her hand over the chest's surface. It wasn't just a container, it was a monument. Engraved along the bottom edge, in careful cursive script, were words in Latin, Veritas ante aurum, truth before gold. Nora opened her bag and began photographing everything, each panel, each relief, every inscription. They couldn't take the chest, not now, but they could record its existence, its contents, and its placement. Lauren and Madeline worked quickly, documenting the structural reinforcements and airflow grates that had preserved the chamber for over 150 years. Then they found the documents. In a compartment behind the chest, covered by a leather drape sealed with wax, were scrolls and ledgers. Each one bore the insignia of the Union Army. Some were pay manifests, but others were letters written in careful, frightened hands, detailing the misappropriation of funds, names of officers, movements of payroll shipments that had disappeared from the official record, and among them, more recent additions. Typed notes on modern paper, bearing Edgar's handwriting, clipped together with newspaper clippings about corporate land acquisitions, missing archaeological sites, and a company name that now turned Lauren's blood cold. Salient Resource Group. Before they could examine more, Nora froze. From the corridor far behind them came a sound not made by nature. Footsteps, metal on stone, voices low and sharp. "They're here," she whispered. Lauren extinguished her headlamp, and the others followed suit. In the dark, they pressed themselves into one of the side alcoves behind the iron bars. They could just make out the faint glow of approaching light. 3 figures entered, men in tactical gear, their movements too fluid to be amateurs. One carried a tablet, scanning the chamber with its built-in camera. Another examined the chest, nodding to himself. "They did the hard part for us," one of them muttered. The third man, clearly in charge, walked slowly around the room, eyes taking in every detail. He didn't touch anything, but his posture said ownership. When he turned toward the alcove, Lauren held her breath. His face was clean-shaven, his features generic in the way that made men like him hard to describe to the police. But his voice when he finally spoke was unforgettable. "Secure it. The window's closing. We extract by tonight." Then they left, their footsteps fading back through the tunnel. But the threat lingered like humidity in the air. They hadn't just been found. They had been followed, perhaps since the moment Lauren had refused Harper Gray's offer. They couldn't risk returning the same way. Madeline pointed out a secondary passage marked in one of Edgar's maps, a narrow tunnel with unstable flooring, but one that would bypass the main entrance. It was their only option. They packed what they could. Nora secured the documents in waterproof bags. Lauren took the ring and compass. They left the chest behind, locked again, untouched, trusting that the information would be more powerful than the treasure it guarded. The new passage was tighter, more treacherous, but navigable. They moved carefully, using ropes to descend the steepest slope, and finally emerging through a collapsed shaft, hidden beneath a copse of trees just south of the ridge. The rain had stopped. Lauren turned once before they left, staring at the place where the entrance had been. Nothing was visible now. The land had swallowed its secrets again, but not before sharing them. They were no longer just keepers of her father's legacy. They were witnesses to something much larger, a truth too dangerous for the world to know easily and too important to let disappear again. Nora held the sealed documents against her chest as though they were a living thing. In the distance, a helicopter thudded softly across the valley. Time was running out, but now finally they knew what they were fighting for. They reached the cabin just before sunset, clothes soaked, hands raw from stone, hearts drumming with a rhythm that hadn't let up since the echo of boots in the chamber. The ridge behind them glowed gold, indifferent to the urgency pressing in on all sides. Lauren could feel the muscles in her back twitching from tension, but she didn't stop moving. Neither did Nora. The adrenaline hadn't worn off. It had simply reshaped itself into something sharper. Strategy, resolve, fire. Madeline dropped the pack of documents onto the worn kitchen table as soon as they entered. The room hadn't changed. It still smelled faintly of cedar and dust. But it now felt different, as if charged with a purpose none of them had been prepared for. They stood around the bundle for a moment, like mourners around a casket. Lauren was the first to act. She peeled open the waterproof seal and carefully began laying out each page. Maps, ledgers, letters, each one bearing the weight of betrayal and buried truth. Nora connected her laptop to the portable scanner they'd brought. Her hands were shaking as she fed in the first of the fragile documents. Lauren touched her shoulder, grounding her. "We don't have time to hesitate," she said softly. Do it like it matters. It does, Nora replied, voice hoarse. That's the point. They worked in silence for over an hour. The sun vanished. Wind swept through the broken chinks in the windows, and Lauren stuffed a blanket under the sill to keep it out. Madeline took inventory of the corporate names, looking for patterns in Edgar's annotations. Salient Resource Group appeared over and over, always connected to land purchases made in the names of shell companies, often following government auctions of supposedly unclaimed federal land. Among the pages was a typed sheet, dated only 6 months earlier. It was a contract offering Edgar a settlement in exchange for relinquishing all rights and research tied to his property. The language was clean, professional. It might have passed as an ordinary corporate legal document, except for the final clause: full forfeiture of any materials, records, or witness accounts pertaining to subterranean anomalies within parcel zone B17. Lauren read the line twice. Subterranean anomalies. The kind of term governments use to describe things they wanted people not to name. But Edgar hadn't signed. The contract bore a stamp in red ink. Declined. Beneath it, in his own tight scrawl, he'd written, "Not for sale, not for silence." It wasn't long before the signal was found. Nora's phone pinged once, then again. A warning GPS tracking alert triggered from the trailhead camera Edgar had installed, long forgotten by everyone but his granddaughter. She pulled up the feed. 3 black SUVs, same insignia as Harper's clipboard, a logo so bland it meant nothing and everything. "They're close," Nora whispered. 15 minutes, maybe. Madeline stood, reached for the folder of scanned documents and loaded them onto a spare flash drive. "We split," she said. "They expect us together. We scatter, upload the files from different places. I've got contacts, people who'll know what this is." "Who do we trust?" Lauren asked. Madeline paused. "Nobody who uses their real name." They packed fast. No dramatics, no lingering. The 3 women moved like a unit now, their bodies in sync from urgency and exhaustion. Lauren carried the originals, sealed again, and wrapped inside her father's flannel jacket. Nora took the external hard drive. Madeline took the flash and the laptop. They made 3 copies, each to go a different direction. As they stepped outside, the sound of approaching engines rolled up from the gravel road below. Not fast, deliberate, like a hunter closing in on something it already wounded. They didn't use the road. Instead, they disappeared into the woods, separating without farewell, without ceremony. Lauren moved west toward the rail access Edgar had once used for supply runs. It was overgrown, but if the tracks were still passable, it would lead her toward a station and eventually a place with Wi-Fi and cameras. Her legs ached as she pushed through the underbrush, the weight of the papers against her chest pressing like armor. Branches caught her hair, thorns tore the sleeves of her jacket, but she didn't stop. Once she thought she heard movement behind her, but when she turned, there was only shadow. The land had always protected its secrets. Maybe now it was protecting her. Nora, for her part, doubled back through the old quarry path. Dangerous in the dark, but faster. She moved quickly, her flashlight wrapped in cloth to dim the beam. Her thoughts churned, not in panic, but in memory. She could see her grandfather sitting in the sunlight, whittling bits of wood as he hummed to himself. Everyone had dismissed him, even Mom once, but not her. She'd always known he saw something the world didn't want to look at. She reached the abandoned ranger tower near the eastern ridge just before midnight. The structure was rickety but high enough for a signal. Her fingers trembled as she plugged in the drive and opened a secure cloud transfer. She typed one sentence into the anonymous Dropbox. "If I disappear, this explains why." Then she hit send. Far across the forest, Madeline reached a payphone near an old gas station, slipped a burner phone into the mailbox of a contact, and disappeared into the night. Her role was clear now. She was no longer an observer. She was the amplifier, the one who made sure the noise couldn't be quieted. Back in the hills, as dawn pushed away the shadows, the SUVs found the cabin empty. They moved through it like insects measured, methodical, sterile. They opened drawers, pulled up floorboards, tore pages from the walls. They found nothing that mattered to them. What they didn't see was the signal already sent, the files spreading, the truth multiplying like spores in the wind. Days passed. The news moved slow at first. A leaked memo here, an investigative article questioning federal land auctions, an anonymous upload showing century-old union ledgers with mismatched payment trails. Then a story broke small, at first in a regional journal. Historic Civil War documents reveal financial discrepancies, buried gold allegations. A day later, another headline, then national, then global. Lauren watched it unfold from a borrowed room above a coffee shop in Asheville. She hadn't slept much, but she was still standing. Her face wasn't on the news, but she saw the shape of their work everywhere. Nora had reconnected from a safe location. Madeline had gone fully underground. The world was listening. Then the letters started arriving, from descendants of soldiers whose names were listed in the ledgers, from scholars who had been shut out of archives for decades, from reporters offering questions, some too close to the truth, from strangers who simply wrote to say, "Thank you." We always knew there was more to the story. One morning, weeks after they had fled the ridge, Lauren received a package with no return address. Inside was a single item, the compass wrapped in cloth. The note said only, "Hold on to the line. They still want it gone." She understood then that the line they had drawn, the one Edgar had defended, the one she and Nora had crossed, was not just between past and present. It was between silence and defiance, between forgetting and remembering. Lauren stood by the window and looked at the world with new eyes. The forest wasn't just forest. The land wasn't just earth. It was memory. It was record. It was resistance. They hadn't gone searching for gold. They'd gone searching for meaning. And in the end, they found it in the place where truth had once been buried beneath stone, beneath history, beneath fear. But not anymore. Now it lived, in light, in names, in daughters who refused to walk away, and in every hand that passed the story forward. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. Watch our other videos for more powerful stories and share this one with someone who needs to see it.